This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are delighted to have Katy Hays with us this afternoon talking about her brand new book, Saltwater. And she has very kindly signed a bunch of books for us. I guess they're on the way to us now. I'll put a link in the comments field if anybody would like to order one. And if you have questions for Katy, go ahead and type them in the chat function or the comments field, and I'll be happy to ask any questions you might have. So let's see. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Hi, Katy. It's nice to see you. She was reminding us that her first book, The Cloisters, she signed a whole lot of them for our first mystery club. But maybe we didn't do a Zoom conversation. I just sort of assumed we did. But you would remember better than I. So anyway, here's our chance to finally meet face to face. But I think we might want to talk about The Cloisters for a few minutes because that was a tremendous debut on your part.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would love to. I'd be happy to talk about the cloisters and anything saltwater, and I'm just excited to be joining you this afternoon.
Well, thank you. I have to tell you, the Cloisters is one of my very favorite places. My sister was head of the Film Institute at the Museum of Modern Art and an assistant associate director. And tragically, she became ill and died. But eventually, but we used to spend a lot of time in New York, and the Cloisters was always my favorite part of the Met.
I feel like I always joke that the novel The Cloisters was just a long con to get more people to visit the museum itself because it's such a wonderful place and I feel like it doesn't get enough visitation and it's often overlooked. It's so far north. Everyone goes to kind of the Met on the Fifth Avenue, but they forget about the Cloisters. And I think it's such a special place.
Well, it really is up there in Fort Tryon Park. And I used to catch the subway at Columbus Circle, I guess, and there's a really long ride and kind of a shaky elevator that takes you up to park level. You can also see it if you do the Circle Line tour from wherever over at the Hudson at like 32nd Street or something. There's a tour, and it goes up around Queens and then comes back. But my favorite story about the Cloisters, you will love this, is that years and years ago there was a terrible blizzard in New York. But I took I think she was maybe 7, little granddaughter with me. And it was a bit rocky because of the weather, but I thought, perfect, we'll go up to the Cloisters. We'll ride on the train, which she's never done, and we'll visit the museum. She hadn't much liked other things we had done in New York. I think she was too little. When we got to the museum, she came alive because I realized her parents, being kind of religious, had taken her to Sunday school. And so the art at the Cloisters really spoke to her because it was stories that she knew as opposed to, other things that were unfamiliar to her. But all that being true, we eventually got to the Unicorn Tapestries room, which I had been in. God, Kay, I must have been in the Unicorn Tapestry room at least a dozen times. I always loved the tapestries. Read Joanne Harris's marvelous book about tapestries and so forth. And all of a sudden, this little voice spoke up to me and it said, Grandma, they've hung them wrong. And I blinked. And she said, the story doesn't follow. And I realized when I looked that she was absolutely right, that they had hung the tapestries where they fit, because they would have to cut them out over doors. And I don't know if they came that way or whether the museum did it. But anyway, everybody I've ever told that story to is always just amazed because, in fact, the story of the maiden and the unicorn is out of sync. Have you noticed that?
No, I haven't ever noticed that when I've been in there.
Now you will.
But I will. Yeah, next time I'm in New York, I will absolutely go and check.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, she was just this little child sort of speaking up, and I thought, how amazing. But anyway, the Cloisters, tell us the background for people who don't know why the museum is even there.
The story of the cloisters itself, the museum, is that it was a kind of a medieval folly built by John D. Rockefeller to house his collection of medieval art. And it was a monastery. It's a reconstruction of a monastery from the French Pyrenees that was brought over stone by stone in I believe, the late 19th century or early 20th century. And it's just an incredible I hesitate to call it a reproduction because it's all original. It's not, a recreation or anything like that. But it is an entire kind of medieval building that was transported from Europe to Fort Tryon Park. And it's a wonderful location. It's a great setting. It reminds me a lot, if any of the listeners and watchers have been to the Musée de Cluny in Paris, it's very similar to that. I think it's the closest thing we have to that kind of really European medieval museum feel. And of course, the collection is wonderful. The Met keeps some of its really great medieval stuff down on Fifth Avenue, so it gets more visitation. But the Cloisters has some really incredible, especially small works of art from the medieval period. In addition to the tapestries, they have great ivories, great carvings, tons of miniatures. It's a wonderful, wonderful setting and place. And they also have great exhibitions. And my novel, The Cloisters, grew out of an exhibition I saw there of playing cards many years ago. I saw a collection of medieval and early Renaissance playing cards and was just so taken with their beauty and their construction. They're just wonderful.
Right. So you decided to write a Gothic novel. I mean, why not? You're sort of a Gothic-y setting. An important part of any medieval monastery, nunnery, whatever, would have been the gardens, would have been the actual cloister, the enclosed space. And then there would always have been this lovely part in the middle. So that played into your novel, didn't it? The fact that, there was a gardener with potentially poisonous plants.
Yeah, I mean, I always joke that it was sort of low-hanging fruit for a setting for a novel because the Cloisters is such a magical environment, such a magical place. And it has this kind of claustrophobic, remote quality to it, which in a place like Manhattan is really difficult to achieve and accomplish. And I loved that for the setting for the book. And I think in that sense, there's a lot of similarities between the new book, Saltwater, and the Cloisters, because I do really love an isolated environment. And I like an environment that feels kind of bounded or in some way limited. And I love working in those confines. And the Cloisters really offered that as well.
Absolutely true. I'm wondering, are you going to work on the Frick at some point, or is it going to be, why am I having a blank? She was just here. Come on, Barbara. Um, the Stolen Queen.
Oh, Fiona Davis.
Thank you. I just seen your moment. I was thinking one of you was probably going to get to the Frick now that it's reopened.
I am so excited for the Frick's reopening. I can't wait to see it this summer. But what's funny is I just read this great book called The Art of Vanishing by Morgan Pager, and it is set at what is clearly a fictionalized Barnes collection. I don't know if you've been to the Barnes
I
in.
have the original one in
Yep.
Philadelphia many, many years ago.
Yeah.
Who was the head of the art department at Pitt and took us to it, but it's moved now, hasn't it? And been
It
redone?
it has a new environment, but the actual layout has been maintained. But there is a new book coming out that is set in what is clearly a fictionalized version of the Barnes, and it's a really lovely novel and very fun, very sweet, very heartwarming. And I don't know, I think I'll leave the Frick to Fiona Davis. I think it would be in very capable hands with her.
It really would be. I know. Years ago, a friend of mine called Linda Fairstein wrote, I don't know if you ever ran into her crime novels, but she did the same thing. She liked to tour landmarks in New York, all different kinds. I mean, the range was tremendous. And then she would construct, crime novels around them. And so I'm really happy that Fiona is doing that. I mean, they're not detections in the same sense, like a police procedural. But I think she does a wonderful job with and the most recent one, I don't know if you've read The Stolen Queen. Well, then you know about the Met and the Met Gala and all of that. And that wonderful movie, First Monday in May, the documentary, which I absolutely love. Even my husband, who I would have thought was the last person on earth that would watch that movie, I told him, how much I'd enjoyed it. He loves museums too. So we actually sat down and watched it together. I was astonished.
Oh, how fun. Well, I did love The Stolen Queen. I'm a big fan of Fiona's writing and her settings and her stories. And yeah, I mean, really, New York has a wealth of artistic institutions to choose from if you're a novelist working in that space.
Very true. So you obviously like, the Agatha Christie format in the sense of a closed circle. There's a difference between a locked room and a closed circle. And I've seen locked room applied to your book, but and it can be, I guess, construed that way. But I think more of the country house kind of setting, with a finite boundary. And so everybody involved in the story is inside.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, first of all, I'm a huge Christie fan, primarily a Poirot fan, but I often like to think about my books, particularly their settings, as kind of a way of building a campfire. I always joke that if you're out camping with friends and someone starts to tell a scary story, it's absolutely petrifying. It's dark, you're alone, it's remote. But if you heard that same story the next morning, let's say you guys went to the grocery store or something and you were told it in the grocery store parking lot, it wouldn't be scary at all. And so I always think about the settings for my books and the environments I'm creating as a way to kind of build that campfire, stoke the flames, bring the lights down, and really just kind of create an environment in which my reader can really believe the events that are happening in the novel. And I think part of that comes from, a love of those kind of closed or limited space novels that Christie wrote. But I think also a lot of it comes from a really wonderful Gothic tradition that I love as a reader and really respect as a writer.
The Gothic has come back, I mean, trends in fiction tend to go and come. And some years ago, I predicted the Gothic would come back, and now part of it's become really more hardcore horror. I mean, there's a whole variety. I mean, we could go all the way. We can talk about Poe. We can talk about 18th century Gothics, which were huge when Jane Austen was writing. There were Gothics, The Castle of Otranto by Horace
Yeah.
Walpole, stuff like that, which is basically designed, in a way to scare you, but at the same time, it's I mean it's now kind of splintered. So that I think the traditional Gothic, where the girl's in love with the house is one way to describe it, really isn't true anymore. There's so many different applications of it, but what you want is what? A lot of suspicion, a cold crime or past incident of some kind that casts a shadow over everybody, some kind of familial, emotional relationships. And then you want that house, you know, whether it's on Capri or whether it's in the museum or whatever, basically it's still the house.
Yeah.
What is your version of a Gothic?
It's funny. I grew up reading, I don't know if you're familiar with this writer. Have you ever read Victoria Holt's novels?
Every single one under all of her name.
Okay,
Oh,
Barbara, you and I were now best friends.
okay.
Okay, that's amazing. So I don't know where I first got my hands on a Victoria Holt novel. I think probably my mom would take us to old library rummage sales when our libraries would remainder books. And I think our library was remaindering a Victoria Holt novel. And at the time when I was growing up, there wasn't really much YA fiction. You kind of were reading, middle grade, and then you had to somehow jump into adult. And for me, the bridge between my younger reading self and my adult reading self was Victoria Holt. And I read every novel she ever wrote. I was obsessed with her. And I did not know at the kind of tender age, I think I was maybe, like 10 or 11 or 12 when I first started reading her. A little, in particular, I loved the romance angle in Victoria Holt. And I think at the time, I didn't know, obviously, I was going to become a writer, but I just was so drawn to these environments and these worlds she created. And for me, that has always been the Gothic, the kind of story in which the world, the setting, the atmosphere, the constraints that the writer creates, those are the things that really drive the Gothic for me. And I like those things to feel really thick. I like them to be kind of claustrophobic. I love a really dark setting. Like I said, Victoria Holt's much more romance driven than my own fiction is, but that is really for me kind of the sine qua non of the Gothic. And then, of course, she's kind of coming out of a long British tradition from, Daphne du Maurier all the way back, as you mentioned. And I think for me, though, it's all about that setting and that atmosphere. And just, I loved reading her books as a young kid and being able to travel, to Hungarian castles and to India. I mean, I adored it.
A lot of things like that. MMK wrote some wonderful books. They weren't really Gothic, but they took you to like Zanzibar or,
Yes.
Mary Stewart's Nine Coaches Waiting, I think of her books is probably the most Gothic-y in that sense. And yeah, there's a heavy romance element. With Mary, there were always like two guys, right? And you weren't sure which was the white guy, which was the black guy in terms of good and evil until you got to the very end, like My Brother Michael and so forth. Victoria Holt, I thought, Mistress of Melon going on, wasn't quite that patterned. I mean, you didn't necessarily have that same,
Yeah.
two guy structure. Trying to remember, were all of them written from the female point of view?
Yes. In fact, I have, Barbara, give me 1 second. I literally have sitting next to me an entire box full of Victoria Holt paperbacks, mass market
Okay.
paperbacks that I have collected from eBay over the years. I have every single one. I
I
love that.
have them all in hardcover, yeah, because my mother
Oh,
and
I'm jealous.
I have an entire closet with shelves. I have all of Victoria Holt, all of Mary Stewart, and two or three other writers that I really liked. And if you really look at Josephine Tey, you could claim that Brad Farrar, in many ways, is a Gothic. It has the same country, limited
Yeah.
structure, it has the same family secrets, the dynamic, the outsider coming in and disturbing things and all. So I wouldn't have called Pym a Goth. I'm sorry, I keep thinking Miss Pym disposes. I wouldn't call Josephine Tey a Gothic writer, but in that one book, she kind of
Yeah,
marries
you
up
can have
along
it.
those lines.
I have a copy of I have a copy of The Franchise Affair right here too.
Well, that's my very favorite of all. I guess we could call that one. I mean, that is such a wonderful book. I think
Oh,
it might
it's so
be.
great.
Yeah, well, I like Miss Pym Disposes too. Then we're in the school. She was a remarkable writer, I think. I once not long ago did an entire Josephine Tey symposium with several authors.
Barbara, I love that we're such kindred spirit readers here.
I
I'm
know.
discovering so much.
I'll see if I can find you the Miss Pym thing. I mean, not Miss Pym, Josephine Tey, because it was really a great discussion. And Jane Ann Krentz and JT Ellison and I did like a 3-part Zoom thing during the pandemic about the Gothic.
Oh,
You know,
how fun.
yeah, I'll see if I can find them for you. I can send you the links because once, this is streaming, all our streaming stuff stays up there forever on YouTube. So I'm sure we can find it. Well, anyway, having done all that conversation, here's our book, Saltwater, and
Yeah.
we're moving to Capri, where I am going in May again.
Oh, exciting.
Last time I was there, I was 15 years old and I got incredibly seasick on the little boat that went over to Capri. There are rough waters around that island,
There really are. It's true.
which, plays into your book. I mean, over the cliff and into the water, it's pretty much awful. Why did you decide on Capri of all the islands? Because there's a whole island thing going on at the moment.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's for two reasons. One is that I had before I started working on the book many years ago, I had read a book by Jamie James, I think his name is, called A Pagan Light, which is about the artistic history of the island and about the important role the island played for avant-garde artists, everyone from dancers to painters to writers. And so it was always kind of in the back of my mind. And obviously, I'm a big fan of the writer Graham Greene and also the writer Shirley Hazard, and they both spent a lot of time there, and I'd read their memoirs about the island. And so it was kind of just, it was in my mind. And I like it when in my books, the setting can kind of work together with the theme. I like a setting that can provide for the narrative of the novel. And so when I started to think about this family being haunted by this death that had happened 30 years before, the island seemed like the perfect place for that. And so the two things kind of came together naturally. On the one hand, I had this interest in Capri, and on the other hand, I was starting to think about this family, and I knew I wanted kind of a watery, closed environment, either a coastal setting or an island. I wasn't sure which. And it just ended up being the right place and happened to be within reach for me mentally at the time.
Wow. Sounds absolutely, well, it is ideal for your book, which I have read and thoroughly enjoyed. Um, to make this work, the family doesn't live there all year round. They're what, a rich, privileged, annoying, pension-ridden family. You think it's always true when there's that much money involved that there are always going to be all these stresses and strains in the
Oh, I think you don't have to be rich to have these kinds of tensions within a family. I always joke that a family is the cult. A family is a cult we can't leave, right? If you've been to anyone's family dinner, you know that no one is as villainous as a sibling or an uncle. I mean, no one can push your buttons like family. And I don't actually think that you need money to have that kind of tension or to relate to that kind of tension or to experience it. I do think that in a family like this, where there is a lot financially at stake, it exacerbates all of those smaller slights, those smaller kind of passive aggressive moments that so often happen between family members. It really escalates it. And so I like it from that perspective. It's sort of like adding gasoline to a fire. And I think if you've ever kind of been on a larger family vacation, you know that a family vacation can often be like a family dinner gone sideways on steroids, because of course it lasts for days and days and days.
Oh, that's true. But with all the money involved, you're able to have not just family, but satellite people around the family. You wouldn't have a housekeeper if they were poor, or whatever. So I thought for the structure of this story that, they needed to have enough money, to create not just the family itself, but the satellite people around it, which in general means that they too have sort of a vested interest in the money. I mean, so you're right, a nuclear family is bad enough, but if you add the rest of it, then you get up and you wind up with players that are strange alliances that sort of form and shift.
Yeah, and I think that that's a pretty, we see that in shows like Upstairs, Downstairs or Downton Abbey. I mean, we often see those stratifications in a lot of, we were talking about Christie earlier, and I think it's a really common motif in a lot of British drama, a lot of British crime. And so I think maybe, I love the way that the outsider character can shed light on the family's tensions and alliances and just operations too.
Absolutely. So to make your story work, where are we starting? We're in 1992.
Yeah, so the story really begins with the death of the wife of Richard Lingate. She is found dead below the cliffs of the island of Capri, and it's deemed an accident, but the family lives sort of forever after under this pall of suspicion that in fact they were somehow involved in her death, that it was murder or they covered it up. And the story really picks up again 30 years later when Richard returns with his brother, his sister-in-law, and his now adult daughter to the island. And it happens again, another member of their party is found dead in the waters of the Mediterranean. And it's about how the family fractures under the renewed pressure and scrutiny after this second death.
So if you fall off Capri down the cliffs and into the water, the body that you recover is not necessarily is pretty battered, right? Yeah, which I thought added an interesting note to the whole thing. But anyway, who is Sarah? I mean, Sarah was a playwright. Sarah was a really interesting person, and I think we miss her. In the family group when we're starting to read the book, we wish that Sarah, who probably was the most interesting person in the family, we wish we were still around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I always say that it's a novel about a family who has everything and the three women who will stop at nothing to escape them. And Sarah is sort of marries into the family. She's a playwright working in New York when she meets Richard. She kind of falls in love with him despite her better intentions and finds herself sucked into a family that she didn't necessarily think she would, relate to or really understand when she married in. And it is about kind of how the walls close in on her as a wife of Richard, one of the sons of this family, in a way she didn't expect, and in a way she sort of finds herself powerless to escape from, and is trying to figure out in at the moment of her death, she's trying to figure out how to get out. But of course, she dies before she can escape. And it's very much a story that's echoed by her daughter 30 years later, who finds herself in a similar situation, kind of unable to get out of this family for a different set, but also a similar set of reasons.
So where did the Lingate money come from?
It comes from oil, so they're sort of modeled on an old, I say old for California purposes, an old Los Angeles oil family. So you could think like the Dohenis, for example.
Right. I know it's sort of hard for us to remember today that oil came out of California because we don't think of that as an oil capital now, but
Yeah, well, Long Beach still has derricks.
absolutely, you can go there. And, I went to Stanford and so back when I was in school, if you drove down there, there was a lot more action. But instead of the really tall ones, there were more, if I remember, they were more the low pumper
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was, as you say, a lot of money from oil. And so this family has property in California, but they own what, as an estate in Capri. Is that what it is?
It's actually, they borrow it every year from some sort of rich aristocratic European friends of theirs. It isn't even theirs. It's just a borrowed house, but it is always associated with them because of this death that happened.
So they come back every year. Why? I mean, you might think that instead of going back where the death happened, they might choose to go elsewhere.
I mean, I think they go back for two reasons. I mean, first, they go back to prove that it wasn't true, that they weren't involved in her death, that it was just an accident. Because, of course, if you stop going, you look a little guilty that you're avoiding it. And they also go back because this is a family that really believes in structure and tradition. And so they are always doing the same things, the right things, the expected things. And one of the things that is expected of them that they've come to kind of build a tradition around as a family is the time that they spend on this island every summer.
So who's Marcus? Marcus is a major player in this. Who is he?
Yeah, so there are two brothers at the heart of the story. In the present timeline and the today timeline, they're in their late 60s. And Marcus is Richard's older brother. He is the uncle of Helen, and he's married but does not have children. And he is kind of the prodigal son to his younger brother's kind of artistic follies.
And is he married?
He is to a woman named Naomi. And he and his wife, as I said, have no children.
So is the money hers or is the money his?
It's both. So she's affluent, of course, but he is as well.
And after Sarah dies and Richard does, how does the money work? I mean, is Richard still alive when we get to the island?
Yes, Richard is still alive when we get to the island. And he, you know, basically he and his brother Marcus have inherited a fortune from their father. And this is what they're sort of living off of. They don't kind of have any active jobs. By the time they inherited the money, it was a holding company situation, not even an active business necessarily, or not an active business, I should say, that was involved in one specific thing. And they kind of come to this island. They're just sort of living off the largesse of those who have come before them, which is true of everyone in the Lingate family.
Yeah, Naomi, if I, reading on in the book, appears to have money of her own. So did she come from, I mean, does she have an independent income?
Yes, she also comes from money, but what I would call kind of newer than theirs. While the Lyngates sort of made their money in the end of the 19th, early 20th century in oil, her family owned a series of strip malls in the 50s and 60s in the post-war period in
Oh,
Los
so you're
Angeles.
writing sort of a class novel in a British way here, aren't you?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So basically, the Lyngates are kind of like the Rockefellers in the sense of, yeah, well, I mean, but that is
Yeah, although I think in New York they'd be considered new money.
very true. Well, yeah, but then we could go all the way back to the Astors, killing beavers for hats and all. I remember my husband and I took a trip on the Columbia, which is a wonderful trip. I love river trips. And as we sailed from Portland down, to the mouth of the Columbia to the bar, we stopped in Astoria. And my husband grew up on Park Avenue. Okay. So he's a New Yorker. And we get to Astoria and he said to me, I wonder why they call it Astoria. And I'm going, Rob, Rob, there's, Astor, John Jacob. I mean, fur trade, whatever, I just couldn't believe that he actually didn't understand why this town was called Astoria. But, those early New Yorkers, that's what they made their money in, fur, railroads, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
oil was actually kind of a Johnny come late until there wasn't any real reason for oil till the, you know, internal combustion engine really got
Yeah.
going, was there?
No, it's true.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. So you're right. By New York standards, it would have been. But I love the fact that Naomi, is almost like a parvenu, compared to the Lyngates. So,
Well,
um,
there's sort of like different levels of new money too. I mean, Naomi, of course, has this kind of post-war income, and then there's another character in it, Stan, who is a tech, sort of an early Netscape tech guy who has more money than all of them, right? But is even more recently, has found himself even more recently enriched than the rest of them.
okay. So Helen is the daughter of the dead Sarah, right?
Yes.
Right. And she's back here at the villa, but unhappy with being enmeshed so closely. She would like freedom. She also has what, a romantic interest sort of hanging around next door?
Yeah, she does. So she every year has come back with her family and obviously feels a lot of pressure to toe the family line and has had a very limited existence as a result, largely as a result of her mother's death, but also as a result of other greater family issues at play that come out over the course of the novel that have really restricted her personal movements over the years. And so she has finally discovered what might be a way to blackmail herself to freedom in her family. And she is on the island that particular summer, hoping to be able to execute that. But while she's there, she also has had a kind of on again, off again relationship with the son of the long-term housekeeper of the villa. And so she, is there with her boyfriend. They're potentially moving towards an engagement, but has this other competing love interest that's been in the picture the entire time too.
Wow. So lots of tension, lots of dynamics going on, and we can't really talk about anymore because we're going to spoil it.
Right.
Book does not go the way you expect. Do you like having like multiple reveals? I mean, a classic crime like a Christie, or Rex Stout. Everybody kind of sits down at the end and either Poirot or Nero Wolfe says, ta-da, this
Yeah.
is it. But your books take a different structure.
I think that part of that, it's twofold. One, I think kind of contemporary mystery thriller readers these days want more information coming out more quickly. I don't think there's a lot of patience these days for the kind of Christie setup where there's a lot of slow build and you really can't see the ending coming. And I always not always. I often feel that Christie cheats a little bit because she doesn't reveal to you the information you need to figure out the ending until the ending. And then she kind of pulls it out from the closet and says, oh, but here's this piece that you didn't even know about, and that's why it happened. And I personally find that to be a little bit of a cheat, because I think you have to give the reader all of the information, lay all your cards on the table, and then you have to still make the big pull off at the end work. And so for me, I like to build a lot of smaller reveals and a lot of tension into the novel before I get to the end, and then kind of hope that I can pull off a big twist for the reader. And I think, that kind of structure has really developed over the last, I'd say, probably the last 25 years in mysteries and thrillers. I think readers really want more and more information up front than they've ever looked for before. And I think that's definitely part of the reason I structure the books the way I do, but I also structure them that way because I want to make sure that I'm not doing what Christie does. I want all of the information to be there so that when you say, this is what happened, this is the resolution, the reader can actually look back at everything they've read and say, oh, I actually see where this has all been built. All the groundwork has been done. I think the tricky part is, how do you lay the foundation without tipping your hand? And that is, that's the balance that every mystery, thriller, suspense novelist is always kind of trying to walk across that tightrope.
Cloisters was your debut novel, unless you wrote something outside crime fiction that I missed.
No, it was my first published book, yeah.
And so here's your second one. So tell us about what you did before. You didn't, you're not 11 writing your first novel.
No, thank goodness. Both thank goodness and I wish. No, so I had tried to write fiction for many, many years, but could never kind of get past the first couple of chapters and was convinced that a long form novel was out of the question for me, that I wouldn't be able to figure out how to make that work. And I think one of the reasons I kept trying and failing at these efforts is that I was an academic for a long time. I thought I wanted to become a professor. Excuse me. I thought I wanted to become a professor of art history, but ultimately decided that that was not the path for me. But when you go to graduate school for art history or any humanities, really, you come out of graduate school really with two main skills. One of them is writing and the other one is critical thinking. And so, I mean, you're kind of on the job market wondering what you can do. I actually kept teaching when I left. So I still adjunct today. Excuse me, I'm going to cough for a second.
Have a drink. I had to silence, I drank something that got down the wrong way, so I had to silence them.
Oh, it's so dry. I live in the mountains of California. It's also just very dry here, so it kind of catches up with you sometimes. But no, so I really thought I would become an academic, and then ultimately there were a few things that made me decide not to kind of finish my PhD and go out on the job market. I didn't want to leave California. I knew if I wanted to get a tenure track job, I would probably have to go outside of the state and I wouldn't have a lot of control over where I lived. And that was very important to me. So I figured that tenure track work wasn't right for me. So I still adjunct. I'm an art history adjunct professor. That's my day job, writing. I'm amazed by writers who can just write as their full-time jobs. I think that I would find that far too stressful. I like the stability of having a steady paycheck. I like the structure of teaching. I actually really love my students. I love teaching. And so I still teach full time, and I write on the side, or, you could flip it the other way. I write full time and teach on the side. But that's what I did before I started working on the Cloisters. And it is what I still do.
It sounds absolutely wonderful. I am hearing insane barking. So, Patrick, I'm going to go see if one of the dogs fell in the pool again briefly. So, would you come back on and see if we have any questions while I zip out there? I had to pull Scooter out of the pool last week, and I'm
oh
no.
Before he drowns, I'll be right back. But I want to find out what's happening here.
Poor Scooter.
No kidding. Let's see. Well, you know what's funny? I wanted to go back to what you said a little while ago. I wrote it down. I said, this is the best line. You said the family is a cult you can't leave. I'm like, whoa, that is so true.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just writing to a friend today that, if you end up in a cult like Nixium or Jonestown, right, someone can come in and get you out. And that's usually like a parent or a sibling or a close friend. But you can't like escape your grandparents, that
Mm,
kind of stuff is the family, I think, in many ways is something that's into us on a cellular level.
yeah,
Um, whether it's nature or nurture, I think it's something that we really feel. I mean, people go to years of therapy to try to deal with their family.
right,
And so I do think it has this kind of all-consuming quality to it.
for sure. Yeah, and each family has its own kind of individual drama,
Yes.
and we can all relate to that. There isn't the apocalyptic element to it, is there? No.
We're back.
Hey,
He didn't.
Oh
There
my goodness.
you go.
what
He's
a
so
cutie.
adorable.
Oh, he's
We have
adorable,
a
Barbara.
plastic thing in the pool that dispenses the Clorox, and it's
Yes.
shaped like a turtle. Their whole desire is to exterminate the turtle.
Oh,
And
how
so
funny.
he fell in going after Yertle.
Oh my goodness, he's so cute.
He really is a good boy. Right.
I'm a sucker for dogs.
He was wet and cold and wasn't a good thing. All right, baby, you can get out. Okay. Anyway, sorry, but I really was worried with that bark.
No, no, please.
One of our viewers is from Italy. Her name's Stefania, and I believe she's from somewhere close to Tuscany. But she says, did you learn something about our culture while writing this book?"
Oh, I mean, that's a great question. I feel like my husband and I both have always really enjoyed visiting Italy. We often go to northern Italy. I live in a ski town full time in California, and so we're big skiers, and so we've spent a lot of time in northern Italy skiing. And I think, the thing that I learned, I mean, I have so long enjoyed the kind of dolce far niente, but I think one of the things I really learned in writing this book is that Americans will bring their problems with them to Italy, no matter how much Italians are kind of pushing on them some relaxation and some aperitivo hour and some like beautiful landscape that Americans will just come on vacation and still be, in pursuit of those kind of concerns, tensions, antagonisms that they brought with them on the plane over. But I will say, one of the things that surprised me the most, I went to the island of Capri for research for the novel, and I was so amazed by the light there. It does have a kind of really special, unusual, and unique light that I have rarely seen anywhere else.
I remember when I went there at the tender age of 15 that I think the real reason we went was to see the Blue Grotto, which was famous both for the color of the water and the light.
Yep.
That's when the little boat pitched so much that, I was desperately seasick.
Oh yeah, when you're in there, there's no good horizon line either. So it's hard to kind of tell which way is up and down.
Yeah, but you're right. The light is truly extraordinary, yeah, I mean, it's a very romantic place. We're going to Amalfi and Positano, and I have never been to Herculaneum. I've been to Pompeii, so my plan is to hire somebody to pick us up and take us to Herculaneum. And then there's new discoveries at Pompeii. The rooms at the Met are really very nice. What are there, three reproduction rooms of Pompeii
Yeah.
villas? But now I understand they've unearthed some really interesting new frescoes in
Yeah.
Pompeii. So I'm looking forward to seeing them again.
And May will be a beautiful time to be there too.
Right. So sorry, Patrick, any other questions?
Yeah, there's a question on from YouTube. It says, Katie, would you ever write a novel incorporating the academic world?
Well, I think The Cloisters, my first novel, is very much set in the academic world. So I would say I already have. I'm not sure I would write another one. Um, I do think academia is such a wonderful setting, and there are some great, great books that I really love. Set there. I don't know if you have read it's, oh my gosh, what is her name? I think it's Elizabeth Schumacher's book. The one that's all epistolary. I'm totally blanking on the name of it right now, but I think academia is a great setting for novels, and that's one of the reasons why I used it for the cloisters.
Often said that the stakes are so, I'm sorry, that the crimes are so high because the stakes are so low. That was the
I
criticism of Tony Hillerman's Thief of Time. He won the Edgar for that one novel, and it's really about pot hunting, but
Mhm.
it's about the point of the pot hunting. Patrick, have you read The Thief of Time?
It's been a long time.
Right, but anyway, it's all about academic promotion, the department head or whatever it might be going on.
Yeah.
But I taught that to students of crime fiction at ASU. It was one of the books I had them to read. They were incredulous. They were absolutely incredulous that anybody would kill somebody in order to get a better job at the university. It just, I was like, really?
They don't realize how hard it is to get a tenure track job. You do act, somebody, the reality is someone
Somebody knows.
does have to die in
Yep,
order for you to get a tenure track job in academia. I know that sounds dark, but it is actually true.
sure.
Well, they say publish or perish, right?
Yeah, publish or perish. It's funny, I love Tony Hillerman. I'm a big fan. My grandparents lived in New Mexico, and my husband is from New York originally, but his mother's family is all from New Mexico. And so we spend a lot of time there. And I am a huge Hillerman fan. So that's fun.
Yeah, we are too. Anne will be debuting her ninth, well, amazingly ninth children's novel with us on April, what is it, Patrick? The 21st, I think, because Easter is Sunday the 20th. So it must be, I know what day of the week it is in August because we have this ridiculous calendar. So, Katie, what are you working on? I mean, now that you've done two novels, and it takes, for viewers, I'll remind you that just because this book is just out doesn't mean that she didn't finish it a long time ago, because the path to publication is quite a long one. So you've had time to do something else if you're pursuing an additional work.
Yeah, it's funny. I will often say to my friends who are not in publishing or aren't writers, I'll say to them, "Oh, I'm wrapping up a book," and they'll say to me like, "Oh, when can I buy it?" And I will have to tell them, 12 to 18 months, and they just think it's impossible and astounding, but it is such a long lead time for traditional publishing. I just turned in another book to my editor last week. I do not recommend having a book due 2 weeks before a book comes out. It's a recipe for chaos, but here we are. So it's in. And I made my deadline, but it is a novel about a young couple who moves to a rural town on the Northern California coast. And they move to the rural town because they have lost a child, but the wife is experiencing delusions that the child is still alive. And so they move to this town in the hopes that it will help her recover from this delusion. And it's also a much more kind of contained environment in which they can manage her situation than living in the city. But this sort of small, safe, rural town that they moved to turns out to be a really dangerous place. And it's about whether or not they are good at distinguishing between what's real and what's not real.
So we're on the Northern California coast.
It's set in a fictional town called Alma, and it is really the stretch of coast where it's set is between Fort Ross. I don't know how familiar you are with the Northern California coast, but it's kind of set between Fort Ross and Gualala or Sea Ranch, that kind of stretch of northern Sonoma County before you get to Mendocino.
Right. No, it's a wonderful place to say. So basically, it's an English village mystery, but with a California twist.
Yes.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Patrick, were there other questions that I stifled by asking that?
Um, let's see. Well, there was a question. I keep losing him here on Facebook, but it had to do with just locations. Are there other maybe foreign locations that interest you for possible future books?
That's a great question. Yeah, I really, really want to do a book set in the south of France in the summer, kind of, like a brutally hot Provence book would be really fun, I think. I think it would also be really, really great to do something in the Alps. I I'm a sucker for I don't feel a need to intervene or contribute to this canon, but I am a sucker for novels set in Venice. I think I see why Venice is so attractive to writers. I think, Daphne du Maurier has this great novella, Don't Look Now, which they made into a movie in the 70s with Donald Sutherland that's great. I'm a huge fan of Christopher Bolin, and his novel, A Beautiful Crime, is set there. Patricia Highsmith, Those Who Walk Away, she has a novel set in Venice. Anyways, if you want a mystery suspense novel set in Venice, please come to me. I can literally recommend you 25 of them. I've read them all. So I don't feel a need to do Venice, but I think I would be interested in returning to Italy for some place like Ravenna, or a very small, like a place like Bergamo, maybe a very small northern Italian town would be interesting. For me as a reader, I always pick books based on where they're set because I like to travel as much as possible, and we can't all afford or logistically feel empowered to just travel the world all the time. And so I really try to pick books that are set in locations that I want to visit. And I think, it's probably why I'm so attracted to setting as a writer, is because I really love to travel through books as a reader.
Sounds wonderful. I'm going to Ravenna in September. I wanted to
Oh,
go there for probably 60 years for the mosaics.
my husband and I are going in November also for the mosaics.
When I get back, and let you know how that all works out. But yes, there's wonderful places in Italy. So I can recommend Donna Leon's entire Commissario Brunetti series for
Yes,
those
which
of you
is
who like Venice.
incredible. Yes.
Yeah, we're having
Michael
to.
Dibdin. Did you ever read his books, The
Oh,
Aurelio
yeah.
Zan?
No,
Oh, if
Really?
you have not read Michael
no.
Dibdin, oh my goodness, Dibdin. He was a very interesting British author, and he wrote, oh, what was the name of? He had this iconic character that,
Aurelio Zan.
yeah, Aurelio Zen, right?
Yeah,
Who traveled various cities in Italy. One is in Venice, but they're all over the place.
all over the
Perugia,
place.
and yeah, I love those books. They're deeply cynical,
Oh,
but
that sounds
He
perfect
was
for me.
great.
no, they were absolutely great. We had him to the store a few times, and I remember going to the wine store and being shocked by the price of that. When it was the one up in Milan, I thought I'll get, like Barbaresco or something to serve. My God, it was like buying champagne. It was
Yeah.
it was incredibly expensive, but well worth it for my, yeah. He died too young. I'm
You know,
sad.
I just ordered have you heard of this book? It's called Runaway Horses by Carlo Frutero, I think it is.
I've heard of it, but I have not read it. No.
Oh, I just ordered a copy of it. I saw that it's a reprint of a 1960s or 1970s mystery novel set in Siena. And I am a sucker. I'll say I'm a sucker for two things. One, I love an older book. And when I'm writing and drafting, I try really hard not to read anything published after 2005, which is kind of an arbitrary cutoff, but not really an arbitrary cutoff. And I love a deep cut book that, kind of comes back from the dead, like the Josephine Tay. I picked that book up when I was visiting my parents. They live in England, and Waterstones has some great crime reprints, and that book happened to be on a table at Waterstones, and I just fell in love with her.
So you're looking at British Library Crime Classics, in point of fact, which Poison Pen Press publishes in the United States. We sold the press in 2019 to Source,
Yeah.
which means it's now part of Random House. But I think that the British Library Crime Classics series is extraordinary.
Yes. Yeah, they're
And now
great.
we have also, my husband thought we should also have the Library of Congress Crime Classics series. So we have that now too. And the March book, or is it April, is David Dodge's To Catch a Thief.
Oh,
With the field
fun.
back, and then there's a sequel to it, right? My favorite David Dodge book is called The Red Tassel, set in Bolivia. But most people think of him as just, Cary Grant and Grace Kelly on the Riviera for To Catch a Thief.
I
But
love that movie so much. Barbara, I have to ask you, what was it that brought you to mystery suspense? Like, was there a first book that you just knew this was the genre where you wanted to dig in for your career?
I read everything, but my mother was a really serious mystery fan, so I started reading when I was just a kid. I've actually read most of today's great authors in real time. Tony Hillerman, Robert Parker, while he was whatever, because I've been doing it for so long. And when my husband asked me as I was about to turn 50 what it was I was going to do, now that I didn't, I think his actual words are, now that you can do whatever you want, he said, what is it you're going to do? Because I was retired at that point. And I was a librarian at the Library of Congress, and I really missed the library. And I said to Rob, I really miss books. And he said, we're not moving to Washington. I don't want to go back there. And I said, okay. And so he said, what does that mean? And I said, well, maybe I'll just have a little bookstore. Be fun. I could sort of do it with my mother. And at that time, Patrick, you might remember, there must have been like, what, 30 mysteries, sort of like the romantasy bookstores that's now,
Right, yeah.
going everywhere. But at that time, there were between 25 and 30 mystery bookstores. So I thought, if I'm going to have a little bookstore, I should have a specialty. And while I read everything, I really love crime, and I've, read it forever, and I could talk about it with my mother. So I decided to have a mystery bookstore, and it was always intended just to be for fun. And then I will tell you that I was hardly into it before I recognized the sheer dysfunctionality of publishing, and the entire world made no sense to me whatsoever. And I just couldn't resist, just like, seeing what could happen. Patrick is really the soul of the bookstore. Patrick is the bookman at the Poison Pen. I mean, the whole personality of the store is Patrick,
That's not true.
who is so, yes, it is, who's so widely, he just dazzled us all, certainly me, when we had an author named Callan Wink a couple weeks ago. And Patrick just sat down and talked about Western literature and all these great writers, many of whom I've never read. And it was the most marvelous discussion, and I was so awed by it. And I thought, how lucky I am to have great readers like Patrick and John and, Pat King. And we're all different. John's the book list reviewer for romance, and our blogger is the mystery reviewer for Library Journal. Patrick does reviewing. Patrick King is into horror and science fiction. So we have a really rounded staff, and so we're not a mystery bookstore anymore. We haven't been for a really long time. It just, that was the nugget of it.
Yeah, the origin.
Yeah, I mean, I love biography, for example. I'm an absolute sucker for biographies. So, I think readers read, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think that we should read in a narrow channel, but try to read as broadly as we can.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm delighted to have had a chance to talk to you in person this time. Thank you for
Yeah.
sending both your books for us.
Yeah.
And I think Saltwater's had tremendous press, wonderful praise. And
Got to ask about that cover design too. What a terrific cover.
Thank you. It's all my editor. She selected the cover for the cloisters, and we were going around and around on the cover for this book. And she had said from the very beginning that this was the cover. And I had kind of resisted and resisted, and we made some tweaks to it. And finally, they came in with this just like absolute, almost, it feels kind of like 90s Lisa Fink almost, the cover does, which I think very, very much suits the 90s storyline in the novel too. And I feel like they really nailed it. It really, really stands out on a table.
yeah,
Did you ever
certainly
see that movie,
colors
the
are.
the swimming pool, the Charlotte Rampling?
Oh my gosh, Patrick,
Yeah.
I love that movie.
Isn't that a great movie? It had kind of
Yes.
captures that vibe a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to go wrong. It's interesting because earlier today we did a different event with a British author who's absolutely fascinating, Natasha Pulley, and her book goes back to ancient Greece and involves Dionysus, and the book is wine colored. And so, it's a different color than the
Yes.
also has, the yellows and the wine and it's a
Yeah.
different palette because so many books are in the blue, green, or the black,
Yep.
especially in crime. So these really colorful depictions, I think, truly stand out.
Well, I hope that's true. The funny thing for me is it's publishing under a different title with a different cover in the UK. And so I've had so many people say to me, I can't believe you have two books coming out the same week. And it's the same book, just different titles.
So what's the UK title?
The UK title is The Vipers. I have a copy of it
Good.
right
Show us.
here. My Finnish copies just came in, and this is the UK cover, and it has a snake on it. And it is called The Vipers, but it's publishing in the US under Saltwater.
That's so interesting. I saw it on the Goldsboro website, actually,
Yeah.
Patrick, and I went right by it. I'm not a fan of snakes for one thing, but um, well, I can understand vipers, a viper's nest, I can see that might be
Yeah,
trouble.
that was the original title of the book was The Vipers. And it was changed for the US publication, but my British publisher decided to keep it.
Well, I think
Yep.
that's one of the great things about publishing is that every country, every constituency,
Yeah.
so that's wonderful news. Well, I hope that it is a big hit in England. It's already a hit here.
Thank you
Certainly
so
the
much.
links and our signed copies should be with us. Let's see, if they ship from California today, they should be in by Friday.
Yeah.
So we don't have a huge number left. So if you're interested, you might want to go ahead and pre-order it now so you won't lose out. Anyway, thank you very much, Katy. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, Barbara. And
Yeah.
Patrick, you as well.
We enjoyed it very
Thanks.
much, Patrick. We spent a lot of time together today, so I'll let you
Yeah.
get on with the rest of your day, right?
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you for
Bye.
joining us.